Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in July. This month, in every aspect of my life, but especially in reading, I felt like I was sprinting a marathon and I couldn't figure out why. And it turns out it's because I read the most that I have ever read in one month. I beat my previous record by 200 pages, and that month I was doing a readathon and was really pushing myself. Let's quickly do my stats before we get into the books that I'm reading. I read 13 books in July for a total of 5,823 pages. Not bad. I had an average rating of 3.67, which is distinctly average, and I had 1 5-star. I had an average page count of 447 pages per book and 187 pages read per day. I read 5 books from my TBR and added 3 books to my TBR. We are at an annual net of -7. I didn't have any books under a 3-star this month, so this is a good looking graph. And then looking at the pie charts, this was a month for sci-fi and fantasy for sure. Over 50% of the books that I read were sci-fi fantasy. This was also a month for series. This is the lowest amount of standalones I've read in a month this year. I read 5 standalones, 5 first books in series, 2 sequels, and 1 concluding novel. And the real reason why I read so much this month is because I kicked ass in the audiobook department. Instead of reading about a third audiobooks, I read about the same amount of physical books and just increased the amount of audiobooks I read. Let's talk about the books. The first one I read was sent to me by Tor, so thank you very much to them for giving me an ARC in exchange for an honest review. This is The Sky on Fire by Jen Lyons. She wrote The Ruin of Kings, which I have had on my radar, haven't picked up yet. But this is a world in which dragons are the overlords. Any human that exhibits any magical behaviors is sent to be chosen by a dragon and then essentially become their servant or slave, kind of depending on how nice the dragon is. And our main character, Anarod, was sent to die for something that she did in the past, but ended up escaping and has been hiding out in the foresty undergrowth of these giant mountains that take up the entire world. And a group of adventurers has come to enlist her to try to steal the queen of the dragons' hordes. This has some really interesting world building. There's so much unique stuff going on here. I really like the dragon overlord thing. The humans and dragons are not working together, and it's not only that the dragons are massively powerful, it's that they actively are in charge. There were some fun flavor stuff about like human culture here. There were flying ships. There was like identity rings that people had on their fingers about like things that were important to them, like their job and their sexuality. There was a fun heist that was going on and things kept going wrong, and that's cool. But the main problem that I had with this book is that it felt like our characters, and particularly our interpersonal relationships, were massively underbaked. In the first several pages of this book, I was like, we are primed for something really fun and unique. And then the characters just go from not knowing each other to immediately being like, I would die for you, we just met each other, but I love you. Even though our main character is constantly being characterized as having trust issues with other people, specifically when it comes to romantic or familial relationships. And it doesn't make any sense. There is a romantic relationship going on in this book, and this is a fantasy, not a fantasy romance. But it just felt like the author was telling us instead of showing us that these characters are so involved and in love with each other. And that continues with all of the other types of relationships in the book. So it really fell flat when this world building is so interesting and fun to interact with, and a fun plot for the most part. So I'm giving this a 3.5. It was good. I would consider reading her series, but it wasn't a favorite, unfortunately. Then I listened to Finley Donovan is Killing It by El Casamano. If you'd like to see me read this book, I had a vlog in which I read this and 4 other books I'm going to be talking about later in this video. I read BookTuber's best books of 2023. I picked out the BookTubers who had the most taste in common to me and picked one book that I hadn't read off of their list. So it was a ton of fun to film. I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a watch. But Finley Donovan is our main character, and she is a recently single mother because her husband left her and her small children for the babysitter, who wants nothing to do with the kids but also wants to get custody 50 of them. Meanwhile, she's also a romantic suspense author, and she is really struggling to write her next book, and she is talking to her agent at a restaurant, and she is talking about the murder she's trying to plot, and a woman overhears her, thinks she's a hit woman, and offers her $50,000 to kill her husband. Finley, needing the money, but obviously not wanting to kill somebody, is like, maybe I'll just go find out what this guy's deal is that his wife would want to do that. Shit goes down and she ends up with a dead man in her car. This was incredibly fast-paced and easy to get through. I blew through this audiobook in like 3 sittings. It was the kind of book that you can turn your brain off and listen to, but I think that I've learned that this flavor of like the campy mystery thriller, it's not a cozy mystery because the stakes are higher than that and there's more like death and serious stuff happening, but this kind of campy mystery thriller is not for me. I've read a couple. I'm not going to enjoy it like other people did. I didn't find this to be particularly funny because I was mostly just kind of stressed out between like actual dire circumstances, and Finley is not the smartest character. She did not set out to be a criminal mastermind, but she is supposed to be a mystery author, and she has so many instances in which she's running into misunderstandings that would be easily avoidable if she had a couple brain cells to rub together. And like, yeah, that's the premise of the book, but like I didn't feel like it was executed in a way that was funny. But like, other than typical protagonist is dumb syndrome, there wasn't anything that this book did really wrong. I didn't end up guessing all of the plot twist, and I listened to it very easily, got through it quickly, but it wasn't the laugh out loud type of fun that I think a lot of people are having with this. And I've heard that the second and third books are not great, so I do not believe I will be continuing on with this series. And I gave this like a 3.5. Then for my book club, 3 of Clubs, we are reading rogues, thieves, and assassins, spies books. This quarter, just any type of main character that is a unsavory, non-traditional hero character. If you would like to join us in August, we are going to be reading The Stardust Thief, and we are currently holding votes for what our September book is going to be. You can find that link to the Discord down below. But the book that we read in July was The Lies of Lo Lora, and I have been dying to read this book for years, like 7 years, and I never got around to it till now. This is a Venetian-inspired fantasy that is about our main character, Lo Lora, who, when he was a child, he was orphaned and taken into this orphanage to train children to be the best thieves, and he was so good at thieving that he got kicked out. And he got sent to this different place for thieves and has become now the head of this con men group called the Gentlemen Bastards. And now there is this sort of political shift. There's this coup that's trying to happen, and that is tearing apart all of his plans. This book was super fun. I so get why this is so popular. Locke is just one of the most clever characters. He's so persistent, and he's constantly pulling one over on somebody, whether it's very realistic or not. I just had a blast. I really liked the organization of this, where we have a dual timeline, where we see some stuff in the past that informs some stuff in the present timeline, and I loved how brutal this was. I wasn't sure if this was a grimdark going into it or not, and I do think I would kind of put it under that category as someone who hasn't read a lot of it. There's so much brutal shit that goes down, but it still was so remarkable that it managed to stay light and fun despite these terrible things happening. I had a really good time with Locke as our protagonist, and I was constantly reading to find out what was going to happen next. And I am excited to continue in the series. I know that the sequels aren't like direct sequels in that they have like one overarching story, but they do follow the same characters, so I'm looking forward to that. And I gave this like a 4.5. Then I made the mistake of reading A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan. This is the 7th book in the Wheel of Time, and I know you're asking me, Julie, why are you continuing on in this series? And the answer is, it's free from my library, and there are people in my life who love this series. I am continuing begrudgingly, and because I don't have to pay any money to do it. The Wheel of Time is a classic fantasy world where every age, the same souls are resurrected into new bodies, that they don't remember their past lives, and there is a good guy who is reincarnated to fight the bad guy every single time. And our main character has been resurrected to be the good guy, even though him having powers at this time in the world means that he will eventually go crazy from his own powers. A lot of other stuff going on, a lot of perspectives that we follow, big world. But here's the thing, I have gotten so annoyed about things in this book series that has made it so I can't appreciate the things that are cool. I'm not invested enough to care about the things that are cool. I'm often bored when I am not annoyed. And I feel like I'm not catching on to all of these things because I'm so caught up in Robert Jordan's opinions of men and women. He is very much a subscriber to the belief that men are from Mars and women are from Venus and they will never understand each other. Despite the varying personalities of all of these characters, every single man feels the exact same way about every single woman he comes across, and vice versa. And they use the exact same language. Like, despite these characters supposed to be like these big important people, and they have gone on 7 books worth of adventures, they have not changed 1 ounce since they have left. Like, you can say, oh, they've developed powers, but the way that they talk to other people is the most infuriating thing. In this book is one of the most sexist things I've ever read. I won't give away what it is, but it does have to do with Nynaeve towards the end of the book. The implications of that are so incredibly sexist that I was like, oh, okay, great. I don't want to keep reading. My favorite plot for the last several books, and honestly since the beginning of the series, has been about the Amyrlin seat and just the power of the White Tower. And I did like that part of this book, though because we're split between so many people, it feels like not all that much happened. You know, George R.R. Martin was right to split up the way that he did, so that we're only following so many characters. Because I just felt like in this one, and in the last one, I felt like not that much happened, even though it was 800 pages. I'm not loving the series. I'm really not sure when I'm gonna call it quits, especially because this is supposed to be the dip in quality. I'm giving this a 3. Maybe I should just give it no rating, because I don't care. I don't know. Tell me if I should DNF this series or not. Moving on, I read another book that was sent to me by Tor, so thank you again to them, and that is The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark. This is my 3rd book from him. I've read Ring Shout and A Master of Jinn. This is about Evine, who is part of the Dead Cattail Assassins, which is a guild of assassins that is comprised of undead people who have been resurrected without their memories of their past life, in which they dedicated their afterlife to this goddess of assassins. And Evine has just been contracted to kill someone who appears to be somehow connected to a past that she is not supposed to remember, and she's kind of feeling like she can remember a little bit. P. Djeli Clark has only written 1 novel, and the rest of everything else he's written has been novellas and short stories, and I wish that this was a novel. This book had so much potential, especially in those first several pages when we're learning about the different assassin guilds. I accidentally read more assassin books than I thought. I read 3 books this month that had to do with like assassin-y, thiefy type people, and they weren't even for book club. Anyway, the setup of this plot and this world is so interesting, and it feels like P. Djeli Clark hit his word count like 100 pages ago, and he had to cut out so much of the book. It felt like skipping through a movie and only watching every like 5 minutes or so. Just because I felt like there was so much potential for these characters and to learn more about this world that like we just didn't get. If there was more to this, I think we could have cared more about our main character. We could have learned more about like what the implications are for this like resurrection part of this world, and it would have been harder to guess what the mystery solution was. So I'm giving this like a 3.5. I really loved the setup of so much of this, but this needed to be longer, in my opinion. I knew this was a novella going into it, and I have liked Ring Shout, which is a novella. I just think that this story did not match the novella format. Then also for that video, I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I did listen to the audiobook and absolutely recommend that be the way that you do it. I actually have, my friend is texting me right now because I told her to get the audiobook and she's adoring it. She's getting to the plot twists. But this is about our main character Pip, who is a high schooler doing a thesis where she can write about anything she wants. She decides to use this opportunity to investigate a death that happened in her community 5 years ago, where a girl who went to her high school went missing and was never found, and her boyfriend was never formally accused of the crime, but he was suspected because only a few days later he was found dead in the woods of apparent suicide. With a little bit of help from the boyfriend's younger brother, she is going to try to solve what actually happened, but there are people trying to stop her. This was so great. I didn't think I was going to like this book. I had avoided it for so long despite so many people hyping it up just because I felt like it wasn't for me. But this is incredible, and this is why you should never write off any type of book. And by type of book, I am referring to specifically YA mystery thriller. I never read a lot of it when I was a teenager, and now I'm not, so I'm especially not reading it as much. But I thought that this was like better plotted than some adult thriller mysteries that I've read. There was a group of things that happened in the solution of this mystery, and I guessed a good portion of it correctly, but not all of it. And every single element that I got correct, I was satisfied by, and every single element that I was wrong about, I was satisfied by. The thing that was probably the most impressive about this book is how there is not a second of dead air. This book is so well edited, so well plotted, so well paced, that every single chapter you are getting multiple pieces of information that are going to be important to you later. I took notes because I wanted to solve this, and it was such a fun experience to be able to put the pieces together along with Pip. And the audiobook is fantastic because it is in interview formats for the most part, so there are different sound effects and everything that go on. You should definitely read it that way. There were a couple problems that I had that a lot of them were solved within the book, and others I think are room for character development in the future, but I had such a blast with this that I have been recommending this to everybody, so I gave this an easy 5-star and will 100% be continuing on this series, which I'm very happy about because first books in series have not been going perfectly for me this year. Then I read another book for that video, and that was Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. This is a magical realism book in which Ren and Lewis are newlyweds, but Lewis has just been diagnosed with a condition that cannot be controlled, and that is that he is slowly mutating into a great white shark. And this is something that happens in this world where people can mutate into animals on the same scale as getting cancer in terms of severity and the amount of people. But this is told in a couple of different parts, and we mostly follow Ren and Lewis, and also we flash back to Ren's mother and her life as she is getting pregnant with Ren and Ren's childhood. The first 150 pages of this, the first act, I thought were 5 stars, amazing, brilliant. I felt like I had a weight on my chest every single time I was reading it because it was so emotionally powerful, and I felt so much dread. And then these second and third sections, they felt relevant to the first part, but they did not feel as emotional or unique as the first part did. I think the writing style in this is great. It is something that I really like. We also have a lot of chapters that look like this where it's not even a full page. This is going to work for a lot of people because there are so many metaphors about gradually losing something to something that is out of their control. This was really solid, and I gave it a 4.25. Another book for the video I read was Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. This is a prequel series to a different series, but you don't have to have read either to start the other. This is a Bronze Age settinged fantasy in which there are 2 types of creatures in this world: the Frey, which are like elves, and the Rune, who are the humans. And the Frey live such long lives, and they're so strong and powerful, and they have magic, and the humans are not any of those things. So the humans have thought for so long that the Frey were just immortals that couldn't be killed. And one of our main characters has an altercation with the Frey, stabs him, accidentally ends up killing him, not even knowing that that's a possibility. That ends up spurring a war between the Frey and humans. So in this video that I did, the person recommended the full series as one of her favorite books. And she was like, the stuff that happens in this is so epic and legendary. and I did not get that from this first book. I feel like this book is all setup, not a lot of payoff, which maybe that means the payoff in the next books are so much better, but having had that pitch, this book was a bit of a letdown. There wasn't any one specific thing that I thought that this book did bad, but there wasn't anything I was excited about or wanted to return to. I wasn't particularly attached to the characters, and ultimately I was just waiting for something to happen, and nothing happened. I gave this a 3-star because I do have this book available to me for free. I would not say no to continuing on in the series, especially because I've seen that the books improve as they go on. So maybe that's just the first book and there's more payoff in the next ones. Then I was reading 3 physical books at once and had to finish them at the end of the month, so I listened to a couple of audiobooks to bide my time. The first of those being Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the 3rd book in the Murderbot series, which is about a cyborg-like creature who calls itself Murderbot. Long ago, it had a crew of humans that it has been accused of killing all of them, but it doesn't have any memories of that, and so Murderbot has been trying to deal with that the last several books, trying to figure out what its relationship to humans is. But Murderbot doesn't like to think about that and doesn't want to talk to humans. All it wants to do is watch its soap dramas. And in this book, the company who accused Murderbot of doing this seems to be under some fire, and at the same time, Murderbot is trying to help a crew out to try to get a specific object. And while Murderbot is trying to hide from the humans on the crew, it is interacting with this other AI who seems to be very happy, and that is not boding well for Murderbot. This is a novella, but it felt so much shorter than the previous book. I was halfway through this book and I was like, dang, nothing has happened yet. Did I miss something? So I would like reverse to make sure I didn't miss anything. I didn't miss anything. Not a whole lot happens in this book until like over halfway through. I didn't feel as connected to Murderbot in this book or to the plot and emotional things that do happen in this book. This was about a 3 for me. Then I listened to Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. I picked this up because it was on my library TBR and was actively available, but I picked this one of the ones that I could specifically because I saw that this was on the New York Times 100 Best Books of the 21st Century list. Obviously, none of us are really super happy with how that list turned out, but seeing that a Black female author was the only author to appear 3 times on the list, I was definitely intrigued to finally pick up her books. We do follow 3 different perspectives in this book, but the main character is Jojo, who is a 13-year-old boy. He is mixed race, his mom is Black, and his dad is white, and they are both drug addicts, and so they have mostly neglected to raise him and his little sister Kayla, who is 3, and they have been raised by their grandparents on their mom's side, because the grandparents on the dad's side, they are not at all accepting of the Black grandchildren that they have. There isn't a very strong plot of this book, but the main things that are happening are their grandparents aren't really able to take care of them because the grandmother is dying of cancer and is at the end of her life, and Leonie is taking Jojo and Kayla to pick up their father who's being released from prison. This book is really complex and deals with a lot of stuff at different levels of subtlety or obviousness over what is a fairly short book. And I thought that that was really impressive. Jesmyn Ward has been compared to Morrison. I have read Beloved and I did quite like that. And I do see the connections there with the sort of speculative elements that we get into. I thought that this did such a good job portraying everybody so complexly. There were a lot of subject matter that this covers, like the prison system, injustice, police brutality, drugs, and how that affects a family, and how your past can stay around to haunt not only you, but also your family. And I felt a lot of complicated feelings, particularly about Leonie, who we do see from her perspective. You know, she loves her children in her own way, but she's neglecting them. She, doesn't even feed her own kids. And she's jealous of Jojo, a 13-year-old who has a better relationship with the 3-year-old, and it's solely because she has made him step up to be a parent. because she hasn't been one. This was just like not my favorite story that I've ever read. There not being a lot of plot didn't do it for me and felt like some things resolved pretty quickly. Also, I did listen to this on audio, but I would not recommend the audiobook because for the first like half of the book, one of the narrators whispers at the end of every single one of their lines. Like they'll be talking at the beginning and then they'll start whispering. In the second half, the actor doesn't do that anymore, but that's like voice acting 101 and made it way harder to hear what was going on. So I'm giving this book a 4-star. I will be highly recommending it to a lot of people, but it ultimately wasn't like my favorite story that I've ever read. Then the first of those 3 physical books that I was reading was These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. This is the last book that I read in the vlog. This is a sci-fi space opera cat and mouse type book where we are in this empire called the Kingdom. 100 years ago, there was this genocide that was committed against this ethnic group that's kind of outside of the kingdom. It was just over natural resources that they just wiped out 2 million people. And one of our main characters, 80 years later, who is a thief called Jun, has come into the possession of an artifact that seems to be able to shed some more light on what actually happened around that genocide. We have 2 other characters that are hunting Jun down. We have Essek, who is a member of a very rich and influential family in the kingdom and is this brutal cleric who will kill anybody. And there is Chono, who is the former mentee of Essek and is now having to work with Essek again after having a terrible experience with her in the past and trying to figure out what she really should be doing. And a lot of the questions of this book are, what are the characters' loyalties? There's also this character called Six, who Essek and Chono have been hunting down for years, and they think this might have something to do with it. There was a lot of interesting world building stuff here with, again, a queer noir book. Love it. I think the action and the pacing of this was really great, where we are constantly moving on to the next thing. We're flipping back and forth between a lot of different perspectives. And I would say it is more about, again, those loyalties rather than the mystery that this book sets up, what really happened about the genocide. It becomes pretty obvious what happened, and the characters kind of stop going after that particular line of inquiry because they just are like running for their lives and everything. And I feel like I would have liked more from that plot line. I wasn't particularly attached emotionally to any of the characters, but I did think 2 of the 3 of them were interesting characters to follow. The third one was the one I thought I would be most invested in, and then I kind of didn't care as much. But one thing I did like is that it showed our characters' prejudices against this discriminated against and genocided against a group of people because of how good the propaganda of the state has been. And the characters themselves don't understand that they're being discriminatory until it's straight up called to their face. There were a lot of things that I liked. I think the comparison that this is made to A Memory Called Empire is apt. If you liked A Memory Called Empire, keep watching because I've got another review for you. Definitely some world building things that I think I wanted more from to be able to really absorb things that were going on in this world. So I'm giving this a 4. Definitely going to continue with the series when the next one comes out. Second to last book of the month, I read The Overstory by Richard Powers. This book was on my radar, like I knew about it, but it wasn't on my TBR at all. But my boyfriend just graduated college and he decided that he wanted us to buddy read a book together to kind of get him back into reading. He's such a big sci-fi fantasy fan that I was surprised he picked this, but he is an environmental scientist. So this is a literary epic, I think that word is appropriate for the scale of this book, that is about environmentalism and specifically the loss of America's old forests. And a group of people are having different journeys towards environmentalism and trying to save the forests. So we have 9 characters that we follow. In the first 150 pages are short stories introducing the backgrounds of each of these characters, and the other 350 pages, although it feels like 700, are the different perspectives woven together. I think Richard Powers is a very great writer. I can tell from his prose and the sort of literary devices and the way that he plots. This actually made the New York Times 100 Best Books list as well. Total coincidence that we were already reading it, by the time the list came out. Had no idea. And I get it. I think the themes of this book are so strong, and it brings up so many different points that bring you towards environmentalism and why it is so important for us as humans to recognize the importance of trees. The thing is, this book is so long, and it did not need to be. There are characters that are just not as important as other ones, and I didn't feel like we needed to spend all the time that we did. There were definitely parts of this book that felt a little bit redundant, and maybe we could have skipped through more. I just think this book needed to be edited down more, despite it having so much good content in it. My favorite perspectives were probably Nile and Patricia. Nile is a video game designer, and Patricia is a dendronologist who is inspired by two real-life dendronologists. I also thought that the author is like purposefully obfuscating things that didn't need to be. Like, there are some elements of this that are so up in the air that didn't necessarily need to be. There were just some like literary things that I felt like the author was trying to do to serve the purpose of the story that I just kind of felt like got in the way. Let me have chapter breaks. I don't think that's that hard. There were some literary things that I thought went very well in this book, and there's some choices that I just kind of was meh on. The themes of this book are fantastic, but I don't think I'll be recommending this widely because of how dense this book is. I don't think that this is such an easily palatable thing, and I don't think it needed to be, but I just like didn't have the brilliant, amazing, mind-blowing time that I think it could have been if this had an editor. I don't know. I really don't know what I'm giving this book. I think I might just put it at a 3.5 for now. And finally, the last book that I read in July was A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martin. This is the second book in the Teixcalon duology, so I have finished a series. Let's go! I have really been trying to push myself to close out series in terms of continuing in them, finishing them, or just DNFing them. So glad that I got to this because it has been staring at me for a bit. And if you notice this weird page thing, I've owned this book for over a year, and I didn't notice that this page was folded like this, and it was the bottom of the page was bound into the binding before the pages were cut to the right size and everything, so I had to physically rip this book to be able to read that page. I was really sad about that, but there's nothing I can do about it except trim the page now because I've owned this for so long. This is the sequel to A Memory Called Empire, in which our main character, Mahit, is a citizen of this space station where the people had this culture where they have this thing that they put into their brain that is the memories of previous people who came before them who did their job. And our main character has been raised since she was pretty young to be an ambassador to this empire that is all spanning, and she has been obsessed with their culture for forever, and she has just had the memory implanted of this previous ambassador, but it is 15 years out of date because the ambassador did not come back to update it because he died suspiciously while on this other planet. And in the first book, she is trying to figure out what happened with her predecessor while also trying not to get killed. And in this book, there is an alien armada that Mahit has kind of been roped into trying to figure out what's going on with that. I won't say anything more. I loved the first book. I think I gave that like a 4.5, and I thought that this was a good successor. A fantastic one, a good one. This is not the first duology that I've read where the first book very much follows one character, and then the second book splits it into a ton of different perspectives, and you're kind of like, well, I wanted to hear from my main character. Why couldn't the main character have done this? Maybe I'm misremembering the first book, but that's how I felt. I think the themes in this book are even more prevalent than they were in the first book. This, again, talks about genocide, it talks about colonialism, it talks about how people are constantly othered and how pervasive the ideas of colonialism are, whether you are part of the colonizer culture or the colonized. I thought that those conversations were great. I just kind of didn't care about some of our perspectives that weren't Mahit. Nine Hibiscus is a new character that we follow in this book. Like, I understand the plot function of having that character run that perspective, but I just kind of didn't care about that character as much. And we have 8 Antidote from book 1 doing more stuff. I felt like he kind of could have been cut down on a little bit. His plot was fairly interesting, but not nearly as interesting as Mahit's plot. I liked the mystery element of this, and the sci-fi introductions that are going on here. I need to read more first contact fiction because I really do love it. It's something I really adore. I didn't love the plotting and the balance of the characters nearly as much as I liked the first book. So I am giving this a 4-star. And after filming this twice, I am finally done with my July wrap-up. Please let me know what you read in July. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought. If you'd like to follow me anywhere, you can find me at my link in the description. It has my Instagram, my Goodreads, the Discord for my book club, my Etsy if you would like a reader spreadsheet, everything I do. And if you would like to watch more from me, you can hit that subscribe button. Next up, I have my Friendathon vlogs coming out. I'm going to be doing 2 5-day vlogs following all the books that I read during Friendathon, and it's going to be a ton of fun, so I hope you join me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.